Hello everyone. Hi. I'm just going to double check that everything is set up and ready to go, and then we'll start. All right. So let me double check. If you are here and you're watching live, then jump into the live chat box. You might have seen it last month if you were with us last month with the calligraphy box. Should be on the right hand side of your screen, or if you scroll down if you're using a mobile or something like that. If you can jump in and say hi. Oh, hi Katie. You let me know that you can hear me all okay and you can see me all okay, and that would just be awesome. Hi Debbie, lovely to see you guys. Thank you so much for joining live. I'm really happy to be here with you guys tonight. I'm really starting to enjoy these live lessons. I've got rid of all the nerves that I had about technology and things not working. It seems to all be working fine now, and I've got into the swing of it, so I'm more at peace. Hi guys, hi Amanda, hi Elizabeth, hi Shona, oh Laura, you're joining us from Austria. Thank you. Really nice to see you guys. Well, I don't actually see you, but you're with me in spirit. I know you're at the other end of that lovely camera that's staring at me. But really nice to have you guys joined in tonight. Alright, so this month was all about connections and spacing. Jump into the chat, let me know how you found it. Have you managed to do any of your practice yet? And also, do you have any questions? So tonight, this next hour is really for you guys. I'm happy to just go through the lesson and to show lots of examples, but I think the best way to do it is if you guys have burning questions or specific examples that you'd like to see, then we can certainly use this hour for that. So yes, if you've got any questions at all, then just pop them into the chat, and I'll kind of try and keep an eye on that as we go through. Some of these connections, they're quite tricky. There's the four different group sections as well. I don't think this is something that we'll ever get to memorize, like which letters are in which groups, the details of all the different connections and which ones go where. I don't think it's anything that we'll ever memorize. Oh, that letter's in group 2 and connects to group 4 in this way. But this book is a great way to have, it's a great thing to have as a reference, something to refer back to. And also, as you get into the writing and as you write more and more of the connections, they will come naturally to you. You'll remember that an A goes into a T in a certain way. So I think that you will certainly find this helpful. I really enjoyed writing out this lesson actually and pulling it together. And I think it's something that's so important, because if we think about it, we create a connection just as much as we create letters. So if they look bad, if they look wonky, if they look squished, it can become really obvious when you're creating like a final piece or a poem or a quote or something like that. When you glance at a page as a whole, it can be really clear when you see big glaring gaps or repetitive mistakes or squished areas where it looks a little bit darker than others. So I think that's really key to work on this. Might not be the most exciting thing, or as exciting as the flourishes last week, or last month I should say, but it is so key. So we started off, hello guys, hi Tracy, hi Laura. So we started off this month with talking about something called the basic counter width. So this is based on how you create an oval in your calligraphy. So we were focusing mostly on the copperplate script, and that is obviously based all around oval shapes. Also, if we think about an oval shape, it's much more delicate than a circle. So if we just create an oval for reference here, it's much more delicate and it looks like it's moving. It's got a little bit of movement and progress to it. If I was to draw, it's probably going to feel very weird to actually draw a circle. It's a lot more stagnant. It looks chubby. It looks like it's not going in any direction. So this is definitely what we want. This is definitely what we don't want in any of our calligraphy, in any of the flourishing shapes, in any of the letter forms, in any of the connections. So think ovals. That's the best way to start. Hi Katie. Oh, you've managed to do some practice. That's great. How about everyone else? Has anyone else managed to go through some of these connections yet? Have you had a chance to do a little bit of some of the connections? That would be great to know before we jump in. Okay, so the basic counter width, let's just kind of refer to this first, because this is the first kind of core aspects of all these different sections, these different connections that we're going to go through. The basic counter width is the oval width. So when we create a lowercase o, and let me see if I've just got this in the right position here. Let me zoom in a little bit so that you can see. So tonight I'm just using the Rhodia pad with the grid lines underneath the first sheet. So these are the grid lines that I'm using. That focuses there. And that is just underneath this piece of paper to practice. If you don't have a Rhodia pad, it's great for practicing, and I sell them in my shop with the grid lines ready for you to use. So I definitely recommend you getting this for your practice. Okay, so what we're going to do, everything is going to be based. This is how we would, a little bit wonky, but this is how we would write an O, lowercase o in copperplate. Let me do that again because this is thick at the top. That's better. So this is how we would write a lowercase o. Could probably even push that in a little bit more. Let me know if that's helpful to have it nice and close to see that. Oh, no problem if you haven't managed to practice, don't worry. It's awesome that you guys are here and live with me, so that is really cool, especially if you've got your calligraphy stuff out in front of you for this lesson, even better. Oh, making wedding invitations, amazing. You'll have to pop some photos into the Facebook group so that we can see those, Laura. Oh, there is a lot in section 1. Don't worry, Elizabeth. Actually a lot practice in the first section, but can see the connections begin to come a bit more naturally. Amazing, cool. That's exactly what we want to see, and I know that that will happen for you guys when you go through these connections. Okay, so let's jump on to talking a little bit about this letter. This is the lowercase o. We want to notice the width of this. Sometimes in copperplate there is a little bit of a variance that you can have. You can have slightly skinnier ovals and you can have slightly wider ovals. Both are totally fine as long as you don't create them as circles. You don't want them to be round like this. This would be an example of something too wide. But you can have them slightly skinnier than this. So everything determines how, everything is determined by how you write your O, your lowercase o. So if you guys want to write this with me, obviously you want to make sure that it sits on the slant. So here's the baseline here just for you guys to see. And the midline. This slant, so if we're to dissect this oval in half, then the slant line is at 55 degrees. So this is the slant line on your grid lines here. So you should all have one of those in your pack. So that lets you know how angled this O should be, and it helps you understand the width as well. So this is called a basic counter width here, this width. And this is what we're going to use to determine the spacing. So it is to be visually accurate, so visually similar to the basic counter width. I don't think anyone is going to come in and measure with a millimeter down to the millimeter what the width actually is, but it is important to be visually similar. So let's do a little example of this, and this is a great way to kind of just train your eye to see this oval shape. So I want to show you guys this exercise. Let's move this along a wee bit. So if you've got your grid lines here, this isn't actually in your book, but it's a great one to great exercise to do just off the bat. Take a pencil, if you've got a pencil with you, and between your mid line and your base line, so the small X height space, we're going to create ovals. And we're going to create them so that they just touch. So they're sitting next to each other on the baseline, like that. Let's do a few of these. So make sure that they're all slanted along the slant line. So you would dissect them all by 55 degrees like this. And let me move this along a little bit, sorry. Let's do a few more. So you might think this is really tedious and annoying to actually draw these out, but what this does is drawing them in pencil really helps you to train your eye to see what an oval shape should actually be. And then you can have a look back and see which ones are, you should have them relatively or visually equal. This one I would say, for example, is slightly skinnier than the rest, so I'm just gonna rub that out and add them on again. So you should be able to look back and see, okay, they're roughly equal, and it's a really good practice to train your eye to see what an oval shape should look like. Whether you have them slightly narrower or slightly wider, that's totally fine, but make sure that it's consistent. So you want your ovals to look exactly the same width every single time you write them. Let me just double check these comments just as you guys are doing that. I am using the 6mm grid line. I think it's the main one that was sent out to you. I'm just using that because it's nice and big so that you guys can see it. So you could use any of the grid lines that have been sent to you or that's in your pack. I think I have a 6. So you always determine your grid line by the size of the X height. So this one it's 6mm in X height. That's what I'm using. But yeah, you can use any of the grid lines that you've got as long as it has this 55 degree slant line, and that'll keep you in the right. Should we be using the nib which came with this mouse book? It is completely up to you whether you use that if you like. Tonight I'm just using an Eco G because that's what I've got in my pen holder. I'm also using, some of you guys might have got this already, I just got them into my shop just last week, so I've just started selling these. These are available on my online shop and they're absolutely gorgeous. Like look at that gold. So it's gold leaf resin. It's a gold leaf resin pen holder, and I've also got them in silver. I've just started, so I've been using this pen holder and I'm using an Eco G nib. The Bros nibs, so they're sometimes also called blue pumpkins. If I've got one here for you guys to. Oh, I just spilt them all over the floor. I will get that later. Yes, so this is the other nib that you guys got. It's very similar in terms of the thickness and the upstrokes that you can create, but I would say it's slightly more flexible. It's
some people jump to the blue pumpkin and they absolutely love it and they never go back to an Eco G. Some people try it out and they still prefer an Eco G. So it really depends on what is what's your preference. I would say, however, if you are using this, they do take a little bit more of cleaning to prepare them before you start using them, because the sealant seems to be a little bit stronger on them just to protect them in delivery. So make sure that you dunk it in your ink quite a few times and wipe all the areas with a bit of kitchen roll. So I take the bit of kitchen roll that's got the black ink on it and just wipe all the surface down. Once it's got that full, nice, consistent ink covering, once you dip, then you know it's ready to go. If the ink is still running straight off, then it's still going to be, it's still got a bit of the sealant on it. So Laura, the 55-degree slant line is true for copper plate. So if you're doing a copper plate calligraphy style, then 55 degrees is where you want to be. So most of my grid lines have the 55-degree slant line. If you're doing Spencerian, however, then it's 52. So very similar, very slight difference, but it's slightly more slanted. So yeah, there's slightly different variants for different scripts, but for copper plate, always 55. I love the pumpkin, hate the Nico. Yeah, that's Laura. Definitely. I'm like, I use the pumpkin sometimes, but I prefer the Nico. So it just completely depends on what you prefer. Alright, so let's go ahead with this exercise here. Let me get that in the centre. Sorry, I'll just push that a little bit far away from me there. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add on the A and the H on top using this spacing. So the A is quite a good one to use because it's obviously got this O form, so it will fill that space of the first oval. We'll then use the next oval as the spacing between the letters. We'll use the next oval as the spacing within the H, and then the next one for the space between the H and the A. So I'll do this as an example and then you guys can have a wee look. Debbie, I haven't done that yet. I'm working on bringing it together. So it's quite a big piece of work to create a full copper plate alphabet guide. I have it for, of course, the copper plate workshops that I do. But to actually make a printable version, I've got some different ideas on how I can do that. So leave that with me, because I know it's something that's quite a few of you have requested for, and I'm going to work towards getting it ready for you as soon as possible. Okay, let's start here. So we're going to start with the A. Use the space. Oops, I've gone a wee bit off it there. Let's reposition. Okay, so let's use this as an example. It's actually quite handy that I've gone off, so we can use that as a way to correct. Okay, so we're doing AH, AH, AH. Just a couple of connections in here. So this first connection is from section 1 in your book. So we're going to go over the sections in a little bit, but this is section 1 connection. This is section 3 connection. And then of course it repeats. So section 1, section 3, section 1, section 3. But we'll come back to that. Don't worry too much about that yet. Let's have a wee look. So we've got the basic counter width of the A is within the A here. Then we've got a spacing, and then we've got the same spacing used within the H, even though it's not an oval shape. Then we've got the spacing again, basic counter width. Then we've used the oval again for the A, And what I've done here is I've not come up and stretched out far enough with this next connection. So we have an error here, slightly too short. Then I have just finished this and moved over to recorrect, sorry. And then we've got good spacing again here, good spacing again here. So what this will do is it will help it look visually equal, and it will help it look really lovely. Section 1 and section 3, they're both basic, visually equal to the basic counter width. So this is why this is quite a good exercise to start out with. So we have very equal spacing all along. Well, not there. You'll be able to see how that helps as you go. No problem, Debbie. I'll definitely be getting that copperplate guide out to you, don't worry. So for now it's still okay, because these spacing rules are also really helpful for modern styles. So it's not like this is only applicable to copperplate. When I learned copperplate, it improved my modern calligraphy by miles. It helped it look and feel so much better, more legible, more accurate, more correct, and it also made it look more easy on the eyes to read, because if you're thinking about spacing, it's all about helping it be more legible, helping it seem more seamless, and so that you don't have any glaring errors that kind of pop out from the page. So it helps with modern calligraphy as well, not just for copperplate. I think just using copperplate script is quite helpful here, but you could equally do the same with like a more modern style. So let's push that up and just do that below here. So for example, let's just do a few. So that might be more of like a modern calligraphy style. It's a little bit looser and a little bit less constrained within the guidelines, but it still looks really good and really legible because we're using this oval, this basic counter width rule to it. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope you guys have managed that exercise okay. So that's quite a good one just to explain the basic counter width. Let's go through some of the sections. We have, I know that we only have an hour, so if you've got anything glaring that you would really like to see, pop it in the comments and I'll make sure I get to that before the end, because I can't believe literally how quickly an hour goes sometimes. I think I have so much more time left, and then ta-da, it's finished. Okay. Alright, so let's go through some of the sections. If you've got your books, which I imagine you probably do, that's what mine looks like. Perfect. Cool. Fab, Debbie. That's what you want to do. So we are more focusing on the spacing and the connections, not so much the letter forms, but it obviously helps to have the entrance and the exit strokes from those letters. Okay, so we've got the groups, the 4 different groups, so you can have this as your reference. I think that's on page 5 in your workbooks. We have 4 different groups of connections. So I struggled on how to phrase all this. So there's 4 different letter groupings, and then there's also 4 different connection groupings. Please stick your hand up in the chat if you find this confusing. I really hope I try my best to kind of lay it out in a way that was hopefully not confusing. But it can get a little bit confusing. But first, this first section is we have two different types of connections in this first section, and they're both similar. So I'm going to jump over to this bit on the page. And let's just go, see if that will focus there. There we go. So we've got two different connections. In your book, we've got the A and the T and the A and the M example. So let's bring this over just so you know what I'm talking about. These connections here. So this is connections from group 1 to group 3. So by that I mean this connecting to this. So we have two different shapes. These shapes are, let's put that just above, and we'll do them here. A full curve from the baseline up to the midline, and then what we have here is a compound curve from the baseline to the midline. So a single curve and then a compound curve is one curve here and one curve there, so kind of like your universal line of BT, but as an upstroke. This is section 1 connections, and these are equal to the basic counter width. So completely equal, oops, it's too keen there, equal to the width of like your lowercase o. Like that. Okay, so some of the examples in this section, let's go through some of them. Actually, let's just keep that on there. Sorry, I'm just organising where I'm putting my book for reference. Let's push this up a wee bit. Let's go through some of these connections. We have the lowercase a, which we've already done. And because this lowercase letter finishes at the baseline here, we're then going to want to come up to connect to the next letter. So let's do a few examples. We come fully up. This is this number 1. To add in a J. So that's this first example here. And we can do an A into an N, where we use the second example. So that is the compound curve there. So it all depends on the entrance stroke and the exit stroke of the letters that you're joining together. Let's do a few others in this group. Let's do T into a W. If we were to write like the letter 2, for example, that's number 1. So a full curve up to the midline. Let's do another one. That's connection 2 for PM, like prime, I suppose. Some of these connections you probably won't actually even use very often. Let's do some more. So you can pick any of the letters from group 1 and connect them to any of the letters in group 3 for this. If you would like to see any specific connections, just pop them in the message group. What am I going to? Let's go to an R. LR. connection 2. It's also connection 2. Oh, sorry, I was off the screen a little bit there. Let's do a few more of these. Connection 1. That's also connection 1. So we're doing exactly the same shape with this, the NS here. We're coming all the way up to midline. It's just then when we get to creating the S, we go a little bit further above and then we create this stroke underneath. So similar to if you were to do this like in a modern calligraphy style. You can still do a similar kind of thing, similar shape. That's connection 1. Let's do 1, 2, to T. It's also connection 1. So that's also connection 1 there. So let's have a little look at these. So I always encourage you guys to do a few and then go back and assess what you've done and what it is that you've looked at. So let's have a little look at what we've got. So this is the basic counterweb. This would be your basic counterweb. If I am being critical, I think this is slightly too short. However, this is the width that you're measuring here. The downstroke of the N to the main downstroke of the S. Just see what I'm doing, sorry. This section of the S is always going to curve and tuck under into that space. This, again, as well, basic counterweb here. Move this down. So again, same with these, basic counterweb in between each. It is all visually similar spacing. So is everyone okay with that very first section and these first two connections? So just a little reminder, it's full upstroke, so full curve or a compound curve. So that's what's happening in this very first section. So I encourage you, as you practice these, take every single, and this is a long way to practice, take every single letter in group 1 and then connect them to group 3. So do A, B, A, E, A, F, A, H, A, I, A, J. Excuse me. Go all the way through and then do a C, B, C, E, C, F, C, H. You get where I'm going with this. So it's quite a lot to practice, but it is a really good way to make sure that you're covering all your bases and you don't have any surprise connections kind of come on you that you're not sure how to do. It's a really great way to practice, and make sure that you're going back and critiquing where you are with them. so that you're aware of, actually no, I think I need to do that one again, it's slightly too narrow, for example. Okay, so that is section 1, and that's quite easy because it's equal to the basic counter width. Section 2 is connections from group 1 to group 4. Let me just double check that. Sorry, group 2 to group 2 to group 3. So we're going across from these letters here across to group 3. This is any of the letters that tend to have a filled in dot, or they exit at near the midline rather than exiting at the baseline, like a lowercase a, for example. So let's do an example of this section. These connections are slightly less than the basic counter width, so they're naturally slightly closer, and the reason for this is that we're creating this shape, basically. It's a tiny little loop connection stroke. Sometimes it can also be this, so like a little compound curve, and then other ones it can be this, so it can come down to the middle point between the in the x height, sorry. So let me do an example of this so that you can see. Okay, so this is BI. We have, this is the spacing. So this is slightly less than the basic counter width, which is used for the shape of the lowercase b here. This is because if we were to create this to be visually equal, it would be a very long stroke like this, and it would create a strange looking shape. So these connections are always slightly less than the basic counter width. There's quite a few different ones of them. So let's go through a few of them. Let me pull out my groups so that I can see which ones we're doing. Okay. Oh, thank you, Debbie. I'm really glad it's making sense seeing me do it. It's easier to talk about it as well. It's much harder to write it down, all these different sections. But I think once you get a handle of it, it becomes really natural. Most of you, all the rest of you, have gone really quiet on the chat, so that's probably because you've picked up your calligraphy pens and you're jumping into it. Back to a question about pumpkin nib. Does the tip of the pumpkin nib slightly cross? No, it shouldn't slightly cross. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Here is the blue pumpkin nib. It should split as normal, like that. Like an Eco-G would. It shouldn't cross, I wouldn't think. But as long as you're getting nice thin upstrokes, and then you're able to split it like that, you should be fine. If you have found that it's not quite working right, or the tip of the nib is crossed or something like that, or one of the tines is bent, sometimes that can happen in delivery. So if your nib arrives to you like that, let me know and I'll send you out a different one. But yeah, like when you get a brand new nib, they should be sitting perfectly next to each other, the tines, with a nice thin tip. Okay, so let's go do a few of these section 2 connections. So all the ones with like the filled in dot, and with these little elegant curves. So we've got a B. So this is any letter in group 2 connecting to any letter in group 3. Now let's have a wee look at the F, for example. The F here doesn't have a filled in dot. But we're creating a similar sort of light pressure loop section in here for the connection. So a similar small space in between these letters. We've got the O to now. I can fit in another one here. O to your E. So have a try, and difficult to practice and write in chat at the same time. Yes, I completely agree. Don't worry, just practice away. Looking at mine side on, there's a slight gap. So Laura, have a wee check and see if you can practice with it, and if it's writing okay, it might still be fine. If it's still doing nice light upstrokes, it might still be fine. And if not, drop me like a message and I'll send you out another one. So let's do a few more of these. We've got a V. To an E. So V into V. Also got we've also got the R. So the R, similar to the F, we don't really have a filled in dot here. We have just a bit of a pressure stroke coming down at this section, and then this small loop stroke. So again, these are all just the little looping strokes. This is like the compound curve example. So this is like number 2, 1, 3. So if you guys can see that there, so this would be like number 1, this would be number 2, this would be number 3. So what we've got here with the V is number 3, because we're pulling it down slightly to get in the right position for the E. This one, number 1, because we're going right up to the top. This one, number 3, because we're going down for the E. Maybe slightly over, and this one is number 2, because we have this compound curve shape there. Do you guys see the difference? So very, very slight difference between these 3 filled in dots and little curves, but that is the that's the fundamentals behind these little strokes. Okay, so that is section 2. I want to definitely go through all the sections. So section 3 is groups between group 1 and group 2 and group 4. So these are connections that stop at the halfway midpoint. So we have a few different ones. So let's do this in pencil like we have done before for these other ones as well. So we have, let's go for the A, for example, into, so this connection, so section 3 is all about the letter that you're connecting into. If you're about to connect into an oval form letter, like an A or an O or anything in group 4, a C, a D, G, and a Q. They were the other ones. So anything in this group here. So if you're connecting into that group, it means then that you need to finish your connection stroke in the middle of the X height. So these connections are coming from the baseline halfway up, or coming from above at the midline and then coming halfway down like this. So this is similar to like the very first one that we did. It's exactly the same, but we're halving it. We're stopping halfway up. So the reason for that, I'll just rub that in case we get confused. So let's do 1 and 2 again. Reason for that is because we're creating the oval form next to it. So we're doing the A, we're finishing at the baseline here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to come up halfway and we're going to stop. So this is the connection. I'm creating the basic counter web here with this exit stroke, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my nib and come up to this point here on the midline. So this is me coming up and moving slightly over to the right, so that when I create this next oval shape, I'm going to come down and meet, I'm going to come down and collide with this exit stroke of the first A, like this. And again. So do you guys all see that? It's, if I continued all the way up to the top, I'd probably end up having it sticking out. It's really important, this sort of lift and move across, because if I do another example here, wait on the right, if I do the oval form here and I don't lift up and move across, if I don't move across far enough, what's going to happen is I'm going to jump in and create this really skinny space, which looks really ugly. So this is a big bad no-no. So what we want to do with this section of practice is create our first oval, finish at the baseline and come up halfway, and then move up and to the right, visually imagining the oval so that we leave ourselves that space. Does that make sense to everybody? That way you're not going to cut into your space at all, and you've left yourself a guiding point. So this is where you want to hit. So I'm imagining in my eye, I'm imagining this shape as I come up to this point on the oval to then create it. So that is section 3. So there's a few different ones that we can connect into here. So not just the AAA. We have so anything from group 1 and 2 connecting into group 4. So we can do, for example, start with a D, stop halfway, and then create our C. So that's one. And that is number 2. So see how we had the 2 penciled ones up here. This one, number 1, it's coming from the baseline up and stopping at the halfway point. This one is coming from the midline down and stopping at the halfway point. So do you guys see the difference? Very small difference in these, exactly the same curving stroke, but coming from a different angle. The key point is that we're stopping halfway between the midline and the baseline. So that's section 3. I'm glad that makes sense, Katie. Thanks for clarifying. Awesome. So that's section 3. So these are all quite workable sections. You can work your way through them quite nice and easily. The last section is kind of like, it's the oddball, because the lowercase s, specifically in copperplate, is kind of the oddball when it comes to connections and spacing. So this, let me push this away, and I'm on my very last line here, but I'm sure we will be able to fit it in. So the S in copperplate looks like this. Entrance stroke, extend up above the midline, come back down it, and then create kind of like a backward C shape with a filled in dot at the end underneath there. So that is your copperplate lowercase s. So that's the form of that there. This then does not have any exit stroke normally within it. So as other letters like the A, for example, it naturally has a tail or an exit stroke coming off. The S is the only letter that doesn't. And that means that when it's connecting to other letters after it, there's certain things that you can do. So in the very end of your book is a few examples of what you would do in this case. So the basic rule for copperplate, and I think also would work for other modern calligraphy scripts as well, is that you don't have to connect them, and you also don't want to force a connection. So you don't want to feel like you're trying to squeeze in a connection there just for the sake of it. So what you can do is you can either just situate your letters nicely next to it using a slight visually similar to the basic counter width spacing in between, or you can create a slight entrance stroke for your next letter. So there's a few different options. Using just a spacing method, what you can do is something like that. So I don't actually know what word I'm writing here, but let's just look at the spacing here. Sabe, I don't know what that is. But here, let's just look at the spacing. So visually that looks nice. We have a gap here, we have no connection, but this would be correct, for example. But let's have a wee look, because this would also be correct. So it is really up to you in what you do after the S. I think some of the ones that are a little bit more difficult, some of the ones that come from the baseline are fine. Kind of like the SH, for example. You can pull it up from the baseline. Like that. And actually, if I zoom in here, what I tend to do is leave a little gap. So I come from kind of underneath the S. I don't tend to connect it. I think it looks just slightly nicer if it's not connected. Let's move along. Because some of the more difficult, hang on, sorry, just need to move my work pad here. I think some of the more difficult ones or more awkward ones are going into letters that don't start with an entrance stroke that hits the baseline. So kind of like an M or an N, an N, or think of some other ones. A W you could still do, an R for example. So let's do a few of these ones that are a little bit more difficult. what I would do in this instance is this. So I would again leave a very slight gap, so I wouldn't force trying to touch the downstroke of the S, and I would start at the midway point, so halfway between the baseline and the midline. That's awesome, Shona. That's really cool. It makes such a difference, it really does. And I think maybe focusing on something like this, you know, it's not as fancy as doing all the flourishing and the big capitals and stuff, but man, it makes such a difference, especially if you're writing out a full word or a piece. That's really cool. I'm glad you guys are finding this so useful. That literally, it means so much to me, because I want to see you guys improve so much over the course of this calligraphy box experience or journey. It makes me so happy. It really does. Alright, so let's do the S R here. I would do that in the same way, like that. So you don't force the connection. So this is the section 4. And these would be the 2 different ones that you would have. So this would be like number 1, this would be number 1, let's pull this out a little bit. Oops. This would be like number 2. So you could come from the baseline in just a light upstroke like this, or you can come halfway down into the stroke like that. You could also come from the baseline but then stop halfway, and that would be appropriate if you're then going into like your lowercase a or something like that, something with an oval like what we talked about in section 3. So that's kind of your different sections. Let's just do one of the thirds underneath. Oh, actually, we've already done that, and I've just labelled it wrong. So this would be 3. Sorry, guys. That's 1. That's 2. And that's 3. Okay, so this is like your full extended one, so that would be the H here. This one is your little connection, so that's like the R and the N, and then this one coming up to halfway point, that is like your SA here. So that is us gone through all the sections. So section 1, section 2, 3 and 4. So section 1 is equal to basic counter width, and section 2 is slightly less because that's with the filled in dots. Section 3 is equal to the basic counter width because that's coming up to the halfway point and making room for those ovals in the next letter. And then section 4 is the S's, the awkward S's. So hopefully that gives you guys a really good kind of overview of these 4 groupings of connections. This is where here I do something I did earlier, but this was some of my practice earlier in the week actually, and this is just writing out the full alphabet, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way through to Z in a row. So we don't often have all these connections, but it's a good way to practice your actual connections and your spacing. And right away when I look at this, I can see where I'm a lot more squished in. So if you have a wee look at this, I'm much more squished in these connections than I am over here. So it's a really great way to like test out and write out. And I think as I get further down the page here, my connections are much better. Like I would say this one is a really good set for me. So it's a good way to practice. Also in the back of your book, there is some example, some very funny, strange example sentences that of course use every single lowercase letter. So they're really good ones to write out.
I think we've got a written out one in your book as well. So brine jars prevented the mixture from freezing too quickly. So these are great sentences to work on. But of course, if you've got something that you really want to focus on, it's great. Like, use that instead than these strange, like, use the favourite lyrics of your song, or I quite often write out scripture or verses that are really encouraging to me, or motivational quotes, or all these kind of things. They're really great ways to then write it out and then pause, go back in with a pencil and annotate where you think your connections are great and spot on, and annotate where you've squeezed them or stretched them out a little bit too much, and that will really help you train your eye to see what's correct and what's not. Cool, really enjoyed this. I absolutely love you guys so much. I think I have just a fantastic group of people in this calligraphy box experience, and I am so grateful to you guys for coming on this journey with me. I know I've said that before, but I'm super thankful, and it's a fantastic experience for me to start this and to put my heart and my soul and my effort into designing these lessons for you guys, and just seeing your progress and seeing your excitement about your progress means so much to me, and I love it. I absolutely love it. It reminds me of my own excitement when I see my own progress in my calligraphy. So thank you so much. That's awesome. It is more technical, definitely, but it really makes all the difference. Thank you guys so much. Really looking forward to sending out the March boxes to you. Got some really fab content in those for you. Did you all like the soft mint ink? It's one of my absolute favourites to work with. I really like seeing how it dries in a slightly darker colour. It's a really beautiful colour. Little hint, the next box I think is a really dark fuchsia pink ink, which is exciting. It's a really nice one to write with. Okay, I'm rabbiting on now. So I really hope you've enjoyed your practice tonight. Pop your pictures of your practice sheets into the Facebook group. It would be really cool for me to be able to see those and to comment and give you guys some feedback as well. And remember as well that you have a referral code. So if you know anyone who you think would enjoy this experience of learning calligraphy, or if you know someone who already is interested in calligraphy but would like to improve, give them the referral code, because then you and them will get money off as well. So you both get a bit of a discount. Cool. All right. Thank you so much again, and have a lovely evening. I will sign out. Bye guys.